was once one of the most notorious gangsters in Chicago. Tonight, President Trump is commuting the federal sentence of Gangster Disciples co-founder
Larry Hoover is still directing the criminal activities of the Gangster Disciples street gang from his prison cell. Those activities include extortion, drug dealing, and violent crime.
I believe Larry Hoover is running an enormous gang operation from inside the Dixon Correctional Center where he is housed.
Donald Trump wants to free Larry Hoover, the man behind a $100 million drug empire, a gang leader who ordered murders and ran Gangster Disciples from a prison cell.
What do you know about Larry Hoover's GDs?
I know that Larry Hoover's GDs are considered to be the largest, most powerful gang in Chicago.
Larry, who has long been convicted of murder and sentenced to 200 years imprisonment and 6 life sentences, had Kanye West requesting for his release.
Larry Hoover is an example of a man that was turning his life around, and as soon as he tried to turn his life around, they hit him with 6 life sentences.
Former lead prosecutor in Larry Hoover's federal case reacting this afternoon with disappointment, telling us there are just some offenders and crimes that are not deserving of clemency, and Hoover falls in that category.
On May 28, 2025, Donald J. Trump did the unthinkable. In a move that sent shockwaves across Chicago and America as a whole, he granted clemency to Larry Hoover, the man also known as King Larry Hoover. The co-founder and current leader of the notorious Gangster Disciples had been serving 6 life sentences for crimes that included running a $100 million drug empire, racketeering, extortion, and ordering multiple murders from behind bars. The implications? Far from simple. The streets called it redemption, the media called it political. But to many, it was something far deeper, a crack in the thick glass wall that had caged America's so-called urban legends for decades. Well, Trump didn't act on this alone, because as at 2018, Kanye West was pushing real hard in his speech in the White House to Trump, and he also held a concert with Drake in December 2021. While promoted as a benefit show, its real purpose went beyond fundraising. It was a strategic and symbolic gesture to spotlight prison reform and clemency, especially in Larry Hoover's case, and indeed, it caught President Trump's attention. What did Hoover represent that made Kanye so interested in him? Born on November 30th, 1950, in Jackson, Mississippi, and raised in Chicago, Hoover wasn't just another inner-city youth swallowed by the streets. He was sharp, strategic, and some would say a natural-born leader. By the early 1970s, Larry Hoover had etched his name into the concrete narrative of Chicago's South Side as a co-founder of the Gangster Disciples, one of the most influential and feared street organizations in America's history. The Gangster Disciples, often known by their initials GD, weren't born in a vacuum. Alongside David Barksdale, the other half of this infamous partnership before Larry Hoover, in the early 1960s, the young David Barksdale formed a gang called the Black Disciple Nation, which mostly included teenagers between the ages of 13 and 17. Back then, they were often called the Devil's Disciples. As the group grew, they began joining forces with other smaller gangs. By 1966, they had become a powerful force, mainly going up against a larger and more organized rival gang known as the Blackstone Rangers. Under Barksdale's leadership, the Disciples got involved in a lot of violence, not just with rival gangs like the Rangers or smaller groups like the Black Gangsters, but sometimes even with people who weren't in any gang. This was mostly done to gain power and scare others into respecting them. But in 1968, Barksdale was ambushed and shot 6 times while leaving a bar. The attack was reportedly ordered by Eugene Hairston, the leader of the Blackstone Rangers, who had teenagers as young as 14 carry it out. Amazingly, Barksdale survived and continued to lead his gang. As the years passed, especially by the mid-60s, Barksdale began to see that all the violence was doing more harm than good, especially to the Black communities in Chicago. So, in an effort to calm things down, he teamed up with Larry Hoover, leader of the Black Gangster Nation, to try and reduce the gang wars. Their 2 groups came together and formed the Black Gangster Disciple Nation, with both Barksdale and Hoover taking turns running it. Hoover helped mold what was initially a localized neighborhood movement into a sweeping organization. Barksdale died young at 23, leaving Hoover to carry the mantle, and over time he evolved GD from its raw street-based identity into something more structured and ideologically driven, at least in theory. But leadership always came at a price. In 1973, Larry Hoover was convicted of orchestrating the murder of William "Pooky" Young, a drug dealer he allegedly believed had stolen from the organization. That conviction earned him a life sentence, one that led him to ADX Florence, the infamous federal supermax prison in Colorado. From Dixon Correctional Facility, Hoover reportedly built an underground economy that generated over $100 million. According to federal prosecutors, he continued to lead the Gangster Disciples through coded messages, visitors, and corrupt prison staff. At its peak, the GDs boasted a national membership of 30,000, from street corners in Chicago to college campuses and even the military. For decades, Hoover's name barely left that prison's gray stone walls, but his influence, it stretched for miles. On the outside, his teachings were still being studied, his name still chanted, and his legend still growing. Fast forward to May 2025, and former President Donald Trump, amidst his latest political resurgence, drops a bombshell. He commutes Larry Hoover's federal sentence. A move that instantly reignites debates across the nation. Was this justice or opportunism? A gesture of compassion, or a calculated appeal to inner-city voters? Now, the crazy thing is that Larry Hoover is not a free man, not even close. While Trump's commutation erased his 6 consecutive life sentences imposed at the federal level, Hoover remains in custody under a state-level sentence in Illinois, a staggering 200-year term that originated from the same 1973 murder conviction. A commutation is not a pardon, and it doesn't override state authority. It merely lessens the federal burden. So while Trump's move shifted the narrative, Hoover's location might just change from one correctional facility to another, but remains behind bars, technically 1 foot closer to freedom, but still shackled by the weight of his 150 to 200 sentenced decades-old charges. It's crazy how all the charges on him from 1997 could be wiped, but the death of only one man is what's keeping him in.
I've done my time. I paid my debt to society.
Now, in 1973, Hoover was convicted for ordering the murder of a 19-year-old man named William "Pooky" Young. Young was a drug dealer, and reports say he was accused of stealing money and drugs from the Gangster Disciples. That alone, in Hoover's world, was a death sentence. The fascinating thing about this charge is that Hoover didn't carry out the killing of Poorly himself. Yes, he didn't pull the trigger himself. But according to the court records and testimony given by a member of Gangster Disciples, Larry Leverston, who was arrested by the Chicago police for an unrelated charge after being interrogated, confessed, Hoover gave the order. The hit was carried out by Andrew Howard, one of Hoover's trusted associates. Young was shot 6 times and left in an alley on Chicago's South Side. That murder didn't change anything at first, as theirs was only one eyewitness until Larry Leverston was arrested. By the time of Hoover's arrest in 1973, Chicago police had already been attempting to get him off the street for years, and after they did, the rest is history. Hoover was arrested, tried, and sentenced to 150 to 200 years in prison. That should have been the end, but it wasn't. Instead of fading out of gang life, Hoover went deeper. From inside Stateville Correctional Center, one of the most notorious prisons in Illinois, Hoover continued to lead. Not just survive, but lead. He wasn't just a name anymore. He became a symbol, a king behind concrete, as even kids who were born after his time in street heard about him. The prison wasn't a barrier, it became his base. While doing time, Hoover helped solidify the Gangster Disciples into a structured organization. He turned a street gang into what prosecutors would later call an enterprise, with rules, with ranks, with revenue streams.
He was convicted of running a continuing criminal enterprise that had approximately 30,000 members across 28 states, selling over $100 million worth of drugs.
This wasn't speculation. The evidence came years later when law enforcement agencies had had enough of watching Hoover run his empire from a cell. By the mid-1990s, federal agents launched a 17-year investigation. They planted wiretaps. They monitored calls, visits, even legal meetings. And what they found was damning. Hoover wasn't just talking to friends or family. He was giving orders. He directed drug distribution, instructing members on which territories to control, who should collect payments, and how to move narcotics without alerting police. He handled money laundering, passing instructions on how to legitimize dirty money, mask transactions, and funnel gang profits through businesses and accounts. He enforced discipline, sometimes with violence. Hoover was recorded instructing members on how to handle those who disobeyed or disrespected the chain of command. Punishment was not optional. The wiretaps were clear. In one recording, Hoover can be heard discussing earnings from street-level drug sales. In another, he tells lieutenants to stay sharp and keep people in check. These weren't vague conversations, they were directives. And then came Operation Headache. The federal government brought the hammer down. In 1995, a sweeping raid was launched, targeting high-ranking members of the Gangster Disciples and the Save a Child Foundation he created to help the streets of Chicago. But they believed it was just a front to run the gang. Dozens of arrests, mountains of evidence, and all of it pointed back to Hoover. The Department of Justice laid it out. Larry Hoover, even while serving a 200-year sentence, was still the top boss of a multi-state drug empire. In 1997, Hoover was brought to federal court. The trial was long, the evidence overwhelming. Prosecutors used recorded conversations, testimony from former gang members, financial records, and coded notes passed between inmates. The message was simple. Hoover never stopped running the GDs as he claimed. He was convicted on multiple charges, including drug conspiracy, extortion, money laundering, and continuing to operate a criminal enterprise from prison. The sentence, 6 additional life terms. He was transferred to the United States Penitentiary Administrative Maximum Facility in Florence, Colorado, also known as ADX Florence. This prison is designed for the most dangerous inmates in the U.S. Complete isolation. 23 hours a day in a cell. No visitors, no phone calls, no freedom of movement. But by then, the damage was done. Hoover had already helped build one of the largest and most violent criminal organizations in the country, and he did it while locked up. The scale of that power stunned federal agents. They had seen gang leaders before, but few had Hoover's reach. The Gangster Disciples, under Hoover's leadership, had grown into a force across the Midwest and beyond. From street-level dope dealers to high-ranking enforcers, everyone answered to a chain of command that led back to Stateville. The structure resembled a corporate hierarchy. Orders flowed down the chain, money flowed back up, loyalty was everything, dissent wasn't tolerated. And even from his prison cell, Hoover held it all together. The 1997 conviction was supposed to end it, supposed to break the chain. But many in law enforcement believe Hoover's influence hasn't fully disappeared. Even in total lockdown, his name still carries weight. On the outside, murals still feature his face. In some neighborhoods, Hoover is still seen as a hero, a leader, some even say a political figure. But was that real? For prosecutors and the families of victims, that idea is outrageous. They point to the murder of William "Pooky" Young. They point to the federal recordings. They point to the lives lost in turf wars and drug battles under Hoover's reign. To them, freeing Hoover isn't justice, it's betrayal. But the debate continues, because at the center of it all, beyond the headlines and the politics, is a simple fact. Larry Hoover ordered murders, he ran a criminal empire, and he did it all from inside a prison cell. But supporters claim he changed, that he turned his back on crime, that he wants peace. And that's the argument Kanye West made when he visited the White House in 2018, telling President Trump that freeing Hoover could help stop Chicago's gang violence, that Hoover could be part of the solution. Most people also claim he's done more for the community and is more than the evil person he's been painted to be.
Until the narrative of who he is painted in the proper light, and people are taught the proper light that he should be looked upon, it's going to be hard to have a voice to speak. Whenever they bring him up, they say the notorious founder of the horrible street gang, Gangster Disciples. They say all of that before they even mention the man's name. By doing that, you have already convicted him in the minds of the people.
GD was to bring everybody together, bring blacks together, and Larry was trying to do like build communities.
And when the battle for Larry Hoover's freedom turned high profile, it wasn't coming from political activists, it was coming from the top tier of pop culture. From 2018 to 2021, the fight for Hoover's release was carried from street corners to the Oval Office. It started with Kim Kardashian, whose clemency work had already won national attention. In May 2018, she walked into the White House to discuss a life sentence triply stacked under the First Step Act, and one name came up again and again: Larry Hoover. That visit paved the path for something bigger. Soon after, Kanye West joined the fight. Kanye West, Ye, used his platform to raise Hoover's profile, not from a billboard, but an internal pitch to power itself. He leveraged a White House meeting where Larry Hoover Jr. was present, saying, "He put us on the platform. He took us to the White House on his platform, when he didn't have to do that." Larry Hoover Jr. As public attention grew, the commutation campaign crystallized into a broader narrative of redemption and advocacy, rather than glorifying gang lore. With Ye's influence and Hoover Jr.'s personal investment, the message reached corridors beyond inner-city tension. This morphed into a movement, the Free Larry Hoover Concert. In December 2021, the streets turned into stages. Kanye and Drake, once feuding hip-hop icons, joined forces at the Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum for a one-night-only concert, Free Larry Hoover Benefit Concert, where their purposes were to raise awareness for Hoover's case and broader prison reform, all staged under Free Hoover branding. Even merchandise-themed t-shirts, hoodies, jumpsuits, hats spoke of Free Hoover, blending activism and apparel. But it wasn't just artistry. The event symbolized unity. Two rap giants squashed their beef for a shared cause, guided in part by Jay Prince and legibly fueled by Hoover Jr.'s persistence. But while celebrity support and viral campaigns grew, official action languished until May 28, 2025. On that day, Donald J. Trump issued a commutation striking Hoover's 6 federal life sentences. It was a move that stunned both the streets and the courts. No big speech, no major announcement. But in a few strokes of ink, a notorious name was out of federal chains. This is the truth. Trump's commutation meant Hoover's federal time served would be enough. He was ordered to be released from federal custody immediately. That piece of the sentence was gone, gone, gone. But here's what most people missed. Larry Hoover is still spending his hours inside a cell, and he will remain behind bars for the foreseeable future. Why? Because he's still serving a massive state sentence 200 years for a 1973 murder conviction in Illinois. Even more critical is the fact that since Illinois abolished discretionary parole in 1978, it's rare, almost unheard of for inmates to earn release. Yet because even after his most recent 2022 request for parole was denied, state records show as of now, his earliest possible parole date is 2062, which would make him 111 years old. That means, for his average supporter, this commutation may sound like a win, but it's largely symbolic. Still, it has real weight. It's a signal, a national conversation starter. The federal government saying, "We hear the story of redemption." Even while Illinois remains silent, the reactions were immediate and loud. Yeah, ecstatic, took to X, formerly Twitter, and declared, "Words can't express my gratitude for our devoted, enduring President Donald Trump for freeing Larry Hoover. Thank you, Drake, for helping to bring Larry Hoover home." Hoover's son, Larry Hoover Jr., echoed the sentiment, calling it almost home, leaning into the hope that his father could continue to make a difference, even from inside. He also thanked Yeah for helping them. Meanwhile, critics were scathing. Ron Safer, the federal prosecutor who secured Hoover's 1997 convictions, called the move an injustice.
I was disappointed. I do not think that this is an appropriate end to the Larry Hoover story.
Illinois authorities fell silent. No comment from the governor or the prison board. They stand between Hoover and that fictional freedom, and they haven't moved. In some corners, Hoover is being painted as criminal reform's poster child. In others, he's the definition of why tough justice matters. Either way, Trump's commutation didn't free him. It just changed the narrative, because from state-level sentences to celebrity stages, from Chicago streets to political hallways, Hoover's story is still unfolding.
Because he started seeing what he was trying to tell me, and that's when he said, we dropping this Gangster Disciple title and come growth and development.
Although his supporters believes releasing him would be what's best for the communities, the future of Larry Hoover's incarceration remains a complex and highly contested issue. With the federal sentence now commuted by President Donald Trump, attention has shifted to the more daunting challenge his 200-year state sentence handed down by Illinois authorities. While the federal decision was a significant development, it does not immediately translate to freedom. Hoover remains behind bars, and the power to release him now lies solely with the Illinois Department of Corrections and the state's parole board, should he ever become eligible. The possibility of the state granting him parole or clemency remains uncertain. On one hand, advocates for Hoover, including his family, high-profile celebrities like Kanye West, and many community organizers, argue that he is transformed behind bars. They present him as a reformed man who no longer embodies the violent lifestyle he once led. They believe his release could serve as a symbol of redemption and a bridge to help heal Chicago's gang-ridden neighborhoods. His son, Larry Hoover Jr., has repeatedly stated that his father could be a force for peace and that decades of incarceration have made him more introspective, remorseful, and wise. On the other hand, state prosecutors and law enforcement officials remain skeptical. They view Hoover not just as a man convicted of murder, but as the architect of one of the most notorious and expansive criminal organizations in American history, the Gangster Disciples. For many in law enforcement, this kind of legacy cannot simply be erased by good behavior or even regret expressed from a prison cell. To them, Hoover's influence, even if indirect, may still ripple through communities, and his release could send a dangerous message. That said, while the federal commutation opened a new chapter in Larry Hoover's legal journey, the path to freedom remains narrow and uncertain. The Illinois state system still holds the keys, and whether they choose to open the gate will depend on evolving public opinion, legal frameworks, and the strength of his advocates' campaign. For now, Hoover remains a symbol of both caution and potential redemption, a man caught between the weight of his past and the promise of a changed future.